Thank you, Susan. I appreciate that. And thank you to Great IT Professional for doing this. As many of you know, you've attended other sessions. They have a wealth of knowledge and information in other sessions out there. And some of them I'm going to be referring to as well. First, I'd like to say there is a one-page handout. We don't hand out the slides, but we do have what I've considered to be better. It's a reference. It's a one-page handout. It just looks like this. It's going to summarize everything. You just click on that URL and you can download the one pager, and that will allow you to follow along really well with what we talk about today. And it'll easily remind you of the key concepts and the key topics that we talked about today. So in this session today, I'm going to present some ideas that I've used and I've personally found helpful when I'm managing my teams. Because the end goal here in our session today is to improve our team performance, not only because of the increased productivity, but also for employee retention and engagement, because that's a key topic today, right? How do we retain and engage our employees, and whether they're working on project teams or whether they are our employees and our staff? Managing people is always a challenge, but with a work environment, our work environments today, they do include team members working both on-site and remotely. So it's even more critical to manage our people well, or to manage our employees well. And so today's work environment is more stressful than other. And we're seeing the effects of that added stress in the employee engagement, their attitudes, their retention, their productivities. So in the session today, we're going to explore whether or not we are rewarding substandard performance and what we can do about it. We'll discuss whether and how are we punishing our top performers. Are we rewarding them, or are we punishing them? And how can we address that so that they don't continue to leave our organizations? They become the quiet quitters that we keep reading about. So we're going to talk about that in today's session, and please download the one-page handout. So if I were to ask you to think about your team, if I were to ask you to list your team members or to think about your team members, who comes to mind first? In other words, what is top of mind? And I'm not looking for names or roles, but could you chat in and describe those team members in a few words for me? Who comes to mind when I ask you to think about your team first? Okay, you remember the reliable folks, those who care for the project's success, the client-facing people, good. Those that are easy to talk to, especially issues and risks, good. Okay, so far what I've seen are those who are reliable, that you trust, that are easy to talk to. I like the can-do attitude. Yes, those typically are your high-performing employees, right? Solution-oriented, nice. So top of mind are those who are performing. Sometimes top of mind for a lot of people, or at least those we tend to remember, and sometimes those we tend to dread, are the bottom of the team as well, those troublemakers, right? So we tend to remember the top performers. We tend to really remember the troublemakers because they're the ones that are the most painful. And those in the middle, they tend to slip through the cracks. We do tend to pay less attention to them, sometimes to our detriment. And so as I go through this session and I talk about different team members and where they may fall within these thoughts, this model that I'm going to present, think about the balance of the different performers on your team and where they fall. Okay, so I was introduced to this model early in my management career. I learned it as the energy attitude model. And if you think about energy and attitude here, you've got energy, which is low or high. Are they energetic? Do they tend to take a lot of initiative? Are they passionate? So do they put in a lot of effort? That's the energy. And you can think of it as effort. You can think of it as passion. You can, however you think about that, but energy. Then there's attitude. Do they have a positive or a negative attitude? Is it a good attitude or is it a bad attitude? And if we plot everybody out on this model, first I'm going to talk about those who have a negative attitude but little energy. They're low energy, they put in little effort, and we'll call those the voyeurs. And the reason for that is that they are the people who watch others do good work. Okay, so we're going to talk about characteristics of voyeurs and what we can do with voyeurs. Now, we also have people who have a good attitude, they have a positive attitude, but again, they don't have a lot of energy or effort. So if they're putting in little energy or effort, but they have a good attitude, we'll call those the cheerleaders. And then we have top performers. With top performers, they have a good attitude and high energy or effort. So those are your top performers. And of course, as you can probably pick up on, we want a lot of those, right? We want a team full of those. And then we also have the vampires. Those with the negative attitude, they have a bad attitude, just like the voyeurs. They have a bad attitude, but they have a lot of energy. They're passionate about it. They put a lot of effort into that negative attitude. And so we'll call them the vampires. So in summary, these are the 4 groups that we're going to talk about. And, you know, whenever I present a model, it's not that I'm trying to put people into a box or really slot them in somewhere. We all have fallen in every one of these quadrants at different times and in different situations, you know, but different times throughout our career. So it's not like I'm trying to box anybody in, but I do find this to be a good guide or a model, something to think about as I'm managing different people and based on how I'm treating that person so that I can manage it for the good of the team, for the good of the group. So let's talk about each of these different types of individuals and the characteristics and what we can do to manage them. So let's start with the voyeur. With the voyeur, we've got these folks, if you remember, had a negative attitude, but they had low energy or low effort. And voyeurs, they tend to be complainers. They're going to complain. They're not happy. They have a bad attitude. They're not happy, but they're not putting a lot of effort behind it. So they will complain. They're also your underperformers. They're not performing up to the minimum standards. So they're sub-performers. We need to move their performance up to at least minimum. They also tend to be great skaters. You know, they get by with things and they also get away with things. I've heard them referred to as the Teflon people because nothing sticks, right? So with the Teflon folks, you've got, sorry, things are popping up. With the Teflon folks, you know, they don't get in trouble. They get away with doing, oops, let me go back there. They get away with doing less work. They just get by, you know, they tend to be great skaters, but they need a lot of supervision because they're underperforming. We tend to have to keep a close eye on them. We need to be, you know, stay close to them. They're not very motivated. So we need to kind of prod them and move them along. But again, they're not delivering and they're underperformers. Okay, so Dale, you wrote, I like the descriptions, but when you get to vampires, can that ever be a good thing? Negative attitude is bad, but it says high effort. Yeah, Dale, so when we get to that, we'll compare and contrast the top performers and the vampires. I like your train of thought. I like your thinking here, and I'll put that into perspective, okay? It is a negative attitude, so vampires typically are the types of people we want to avoid. And we're going to show how top performers and vampires interact between the two. So I like your curiosity there, and give me just a little bit and we will get there. I'll definitely talk about that. Okay, so thank you for that comment. So with the voyeurs, we got people who have a bad attitude, low energy, and we need to watch them very closely. We need to get them to move their performance up to at least minimum standards. So what are we trying to do? You can see here, this green arrow here, we want to move them from a bad attitude up to a more positive attitude. How do we do that? The approach we can take is to discuss their behavior. And when we discuss this behavior, there's a feedback or a feedback model that you can follow. And in the feedback model, one thing I would suggest is stick to the facts. Stick to the facts. You want to say specifically what you saw or what you heard. Now, if you would, use your imaginations here for a minute. Let's just say you can see me and I'm standing in front of you. And I'm going to mimic or mime washing dishes. Okay? And if I were to start to mimic washing dishes and I were to ask, what am I doing? Some of you, especially the very competitive ones, will be, you want to answer first, right? So you're going to jump right in. You're going to say washing dishes. And I'll keep doing what I'm doing. And I'll just kind of shake my head no, and I'll keep doing, and I won't say anything. And, you know, if I do this in front of a room, people look at me a little confused and they're like, not washing dishes. And they'll come up with a couple other answers. Maybe they think I'm a bad mime or something. And then eventually somebody will say, well, you're turning your wrists over, you're moving your hand in a circular fashion, you know, in a circle. You see what I mean? You're twisting your wrists. Those are the facts. That's what we want to describe. Washing dishes is the conclusion. So what we don't want to do is we don't want to jump to conclusions. We want to describe the facts. What did we see or what did we hear? We don't want to point fingers or you make judgments or express opinions. You know, you can't say you're lazy based on the behavior in the past. That's a conclusion. The fact is, maybe they're late to meetings. Maybe they're late on deliverables. So state the facts. You don't want to say you're always late because like, well, I've been to 10 meetings on time. I delivered one item last year on time, you know. So state the facts. Monday you were 10 minutes late. The Monday before that you were 30 minutes late, or this deliverable was behind, or the team did not know, you know, if their lack of communication, you can give the feedback of the team wasn't aware that you were not going to be done on time. So they were planning on getting this deliverable and it impacted them when you didn't deliver and they didn't know it. Okay, so that's the fact. Think of the any kind of police TV show, cops, you know, bad boy, what you gonna do, right? What you gonna do when they come for you? But any kind of cops or police TV show, first responders, what do? They talk about observable behavior. You know, the suspect ran across the lawn, we apprehended them, now they're in the car, or now they're in the house. It's not, wow, it was a really big fight, you should have seen it, right? So stick to the facts in a very calm, unemotional, professional, direct way. Now, impact of their behavior in the bigger picture. For some people, they are not aware of the impact of their behavior. And once they become aware, then it improves things. It may not fix it totally, but it will get better. So for some people, that's enough. But, you know, we do need to make them aware of their impact in the bigger picture. So, you know, your tardiness in meetings causes me to rearrange agendas, or we have to delay decisions, which impacts the customer. The team planned on receiving your deliverables and you know, cleared their calendars to be able to work on those items, and then it set them behind, you know, made them late because then it wasn't available for them. So make them aware of the impact in the bigger picture. You know, they may say, well, I was working on the deliverable, which is why I didn't go to the meeting. Isn't it more important to get work done than to go to a meeting? You know, maybe they came from an organization where start times were not, you know, adhered to very strictly, and you are a different organization. And then lastly, the action to fix it. You need to state your expectations, and then what can we do to fix this, right? It's a question, because this is a negotiation. What are we going to do to fix it? How are we going to ensure that you communicate with the team if your deliverable is going to be late? How can we make sure that you produce your deliverable on time and deliver this handoff on time? We need this to be a discussion because we need their buy-in. Without buy-in, we cannot hold them accountable. If we edict the answer and say, well, from now on, you're going to just produce all your deliverables on time, what's going to happen with the next one? They're going to be late again. I mean, it won't be ready. And there's really not a lot you can do about it, because they're like, well, that was your plan, it wasn't mine. So we need their buy-in so that we can hold them accountable. So discuss it. What is it going to take for us to, for you to create your deliverables on time, for you to provide this to your other fellow team members or whatever. Now, this doesn't have to be a super long discussion, right? It could be a sentence or two. It could be a 3 or 5 minute discussion. It could be a 30-minute discussion, but we need to discuss the behavior and make them aware because we need to fix it. And the second, the second bullet, be clear in your expectations and the consequences. If you don't start delivering the, producing your deliverables on time, will there be a verbal or written warning? Will they get crummy job assignments? How will this impact their career or their job or a potential promotion or a raise? Whatever it is that's important to them. What are the consequences? And be firm with them. We need to get them up to minimum performance. They are underperforming. And before you go into this discussion, know your options. Know what is important to you, and to them. Know what's important to them. Know what are workable options for you. Now, as you're discussing this, make sure you focus on each part of your message. The content and tone and body language together, that makes up our message. So what you're saying has to match your body language, right? And it has to match your tone. If you're concerned about somebody underperforming or about their performance, or maybe their performance is slipping, it needs to sound like you're concerned. You need to express that concern, say it and act it. So anyway, just be congruent in your message, be consistent in your message. Also, as a negotiation, we may need to adapt our negotiation approach based on the other person's communication preference. That is actually discussed in this call out box. You can see a webinar that I presented for Great Pro, and Susan's going to put the URL in the chat box for you. But negotiating with strong stakeholders, we talk about different, when it comes to negotiating with strong stakeholders, we all have different communication preferences based upon our style. And so that is covered in that session as well. So Susan, yeah, she's got that in the chat box for you now. You can listen to that recording. And that session also not only discusses negotiations, but also other techniques that you can use that you may find helpful as well. So figure out with your options, what's doable for you, what's more important to them, so that you can agree to those items that may be important to them. And that will show them that you're flexible, that you're reasonable, and you're truly looking for a win-win. You're looking for a solution. Now, how do we reward voyeurs? We reward them by not giving them work, by letting them get away with it, by letting them skate on by. Okay, so think about your team. If you're writing, just create, a little quadrant on a piece of paper. And if you're writing down team members, do you have anybody who falls into this category? And are you letting them get away with that substandard work and substandard performance? And then we're going to move on to cheerleaders. And I've got, we'll talk about each type a little bit later. I want to hear from you all. Who do you have on your team? What's the balance? And what actions can you take now based on what we talked about? So with cheerleaders, we have people that have good attitudes, but not a lot of energy. And so what we do with cheerleaders is, or what the characteristics are of a cheerleader is, they're happy, but they don't take a lot of initiative. And so they need a lot of direction. They need a lot of hand-holding. And they're very high maintenance. And this is a lot of work on a manager. They're happy people, so it's hard to get too mad at them until you get really, really frustrated. And sometimes this can be a difficult conversation too, because they're very nice, happy people, but they just don't take a lot of initiative. Now, can we issue a verbal warning or do any kind of action like that? Not really, because they are performing at minimum standards. We set the minimums. If the minimums are unacceptable, we need to change our standards because they are performing at the minimums. So the approach we need to take with them is, rather than we do want to improve their performance, but we're going to do so by trying to improve their energy. We want to energize them and encourage them. So you can see here the green arrow, we want to move a cheerleader over into the top performer category by energizing them or by encouraging them to take initiative. Now, part of doing this is creating accountability. And there was another session I presented for Great Pro, creating an accountability culture on your projects or with your teams. And Susan will put that URL in case you're interested in this topic. But here, when you're working with a cheerleader, you have to decide, is it a can't or a won't issue? Is it that they can't take the next step? They don't know what it is. They don't have the right skills. If that's the case, then maybe you can mentor or coach them. You can do it yourself, or you can pair them up with a more experienced person. Or is it that they won't take the next step? They won't take initiative. And that's a different situation. That may be more of an attitude thing, which would mean that they might be more of a voyeur than a cheerleader. But how can we fix that attitude, taking some of the steps I've already described? Maybe it's that they're not adapting well to working remotely. Not everybody works well remotely. Not everybody can work from home, if that's still the case in your organization. Or maybe they're at a customer site and traveling is now back, and they're at a customer site, but they just don't work as well remotely. Maybe they're feeling, lonely, right? If you're not in an office with other people that you can talk to and ask advice from, it's sometimes hard, especially for a newer employee or a lesser skilled employee, to produce and to be productive. There are some other talks I've given for Great Pro about working remotely, and you can just check out all my different topics as well that I've presented, such as making teleworking and virtual teams work, or tips for successful teleworking, or how to manage your time, energy, and priorities. There's a variety of them. You can check them out. So now, when it comes to energizing cheerleaders, we want to increase the accountability in these cheerleaders. One concept that I thought was really helpful, and that's in this, the accountability culture, the URL that's right here on the slide. There's a concept that I ran across, and it's think two up, act two over. And it's covered in that recording, in that session. And I think that's a really handy concept to keep in mind. When you think, you want to think 2 levels up. What is leadership thinking, expecting from me? How can I act and give them what they need? And then when you act 2 over. How will your actions affect organizations that are 2 over from you? And what can you do to make that better? The impact, or to improve the experience that your other coworkers have. So think 2 up, act 2 over. Very handy concept. So that is energizing cheerleaders. You could try to offer them new challenges, issue some rewards or recognitions, give them the feedback as well on the items that they're doing well, so that you can encourage more of that. And hopefully energize them a little bit that way. They can feel special. They understand that their actions are being noticed. Bottom line is, we all want to feel heard and respected. We want to be respected. We want to be understood. We want to know that our actions are making a difference. And so letting them know that may energize them enough to take a little bit more initiative, or make them aware where they're not taking initiative and they could. So we want to develop that in them. So increase the energy. So moving them over into top performers. Then we get into top performers. And the characteristics of top performers are that they have a good attitude. You don't have a problem with their attitude. They got great attitudes. They need very little maintenance. They don't need a lot of direction. They're always thinking ahead. They think very strategically. They're thinking ahead. They always have a backup plan in case their plans don't work. It's like a good chess player who's always thinking 3, 4, 5 steps ahead. They're very good at the think 2 up, act 2 over concept and idea. You trust them. These were a lot of the people that you all mentioned during the introduction when I said, when you think of your team, who are you thinking of? You were thinking about people that you trust, that always come through for you, that you can depend on, that don't require a whole lot of effort on your part. They have your back. You know, it's so nice when you have team members who are that way, right? You know, you're not going to be blindsided by problems. They will let you know of them before you hear about it from your boss, you know, your management. So with the managing top performers, what can we do with the top performer? We can offer rewards or recognition. So I was going to ask you all, how do you recognize your top performers? Because not all of us had the same abilities to issue promotions or raises. You know, we don't always have money lying around or things that we can do. How can you recognize or reward your top performers? Go ahead and chat in. I'd like to hear your ideas. What are you able to do right now in your organizations? How do you recognize or reward your top performers? Okay, you use Yammer and it gets announced to the entire company. Good. So you're using a very public form of reward, which is great, right? Good recognition, good reward. We can create a peer recognition. I've created a program called Pride, Peers Recognizing Individual Deeds of Excellence, that, you know, you could issue one Pride Award to a coworker every quarter, and then we had a big luncheon, and all the Pride Awards were read out loud, because it allowed other team members to see what their fellow employees found to be valuable, what was especially helpful. And it wasn't always the big things. Oftentimes it was the small things that people did. But it really encouraged that better behavior. And then we would have a drawing for, you know, I think a $50 gift certificate or something. So for the cost of a lunch and $50, we could have a quarterly kind of team building, right? Virtually or in person. There's a spot award. I've worked with organizations that do spot awards. So on the spot, you can give someone a reward. They can go spend it at stores, right? It's kind of a little gift certificate. There's a thanks tool, which we use to provide public or private visibility to the good work the team is doing. Good. They give recognition in team meetings. We also use what we call a high five award. Yeah, with the high five, with the coffee gift. Good, to Tim Hortons. Good. So you've got those gift certificates. I see a little bit of public and a little bit of private recognition. And that's perfect, because, you know, not everyone maybe wants to be called out in front of the group. Some people do. They want a banner. You know, they want you to rent an airplane and fly a banner around town. But some people want it a little more private. It's also nice to know that you're being rewarded, recognized, again, that your efforts are making a difference. So thank you for that. Perfect. And so with top performers, we can reward them, offer recognition, and we sometimes rewards are to issue new challenges. For some people, giving them additional responsibility is a form of reward. It shows trust. But when it comes to a top performer, we have to do this carefully. We do want to continue challenging them and giving them responsibility, but very carefully, because with the top performer, let's talk about these red arrows here. If you continue to pile on the work that a voyeur is not doing, or you ask them to, you know, not only do extra work, but to mentor a whole lot of extra people, like your cheerleaders, and they're doing, you know, they're carrying everyone else's work plus their own. After a while, they're going to get burned out. Now, if they get burned out, they may move down into this vampire category, or they may leave the company. So that's the arrow here to the right, leaving. I think you can see my cursor, but maybe not. But that's the arrow that's going to the right. They may leave your organization or your group, and that certainly doesn't help you. I mean, that's not what we want. We don't want them to get burned out and slide down into the vampire category. If they do, though, we can recognize that it's a burned out top performer and try to move them back up into top performance. Any of you who are top performers, you'll probably recognize when I talk about vampires, you'll probably recognize yourself in there. I've had a lot of people go, oh, you know, like when I start to describe a vampire, they're like, oh, that's me. So you may recognize yourself. And if you see a burned out top performer start to slip down into that bad attitude, we can work to bring them back up. We'll talk about how. The other thing that a top performer may do is they may slide left back into the cheerleader category. And this will happen if you tend to have a whole lot of group rewards. Everybody on the team gets the same reward, gets the same raise, gets the same bonus, gets the same, you know, everything, right? If they're never really singled out, if they don't feel that their work is special or extra, then they're going to start to be like, well, hey, why am I working so hard? Because so-and-so is putting in a whole lot less effort and they're getting the same benefits I am. So you know what? I'm just going to kind of slide over into the cheerleader category. What you've done here is you've taken away their energy. Now, hopefully they slide over into cheerleader. That's better than vampire. So they still have a good attitude, but now we've taken away their initiative. They're like, you know what? I'm not going to try so hard. I don't need to think 3 steps ahead because it doesn't give me anything. It doesn't do anything for me. And so if you see someone slide into the cheerleader category, we can recognize it and work to bring them back. Okay, so that's top performer. Be careful with the top performer. It's too easy to punish a top performer by giving them too much work, and recognize when that top performer is starting to get burned out, including you. You may be that top performer, so that, if they're getting burned out, you can make sure it's temporary. And so this brings us to the vampire, because that top performer may slide down into the vampire category, or you may plain just have a vampire. Vampires are poisonous on a team. They have bad attitudes and they have high energy, which is a dangerous combination. They're poisonous on a team. They're cynical. They sabotage. They are willfully disobedient. They want to prove management wrong. Yeah, we did this before. I'll show you. It won't work. They're the snipes. They will snipe in meetings. They're constantly sniping. So we tried that before. It won't work. Yeah, that's not a good idea. Well, that's stupid. They're always got those little comments. And it really takes down morale. One vampire can kill a team, right? It can ruin the productivity, the morale, the attitude of a team. Now, recognize oftentimes these vampires are longtime employees, so they may be long-term employees. They've seen where management's done the same, the same initiatives over and over, and then they never follow through. They've seen the promises that never come true. So there may be a reason why they're there, but they often are long-term employees. They also may be burned out top performers. And these vampires, they are the ones that scare or worry us the most. They're the most difficult conversations that we're going to have. These are the difficult conversations that we don't want to have and that will cause us stress, right? They're the conversations we don't want to have until we have to have them. And they're causing us stress. And you can see here in the call out, the webinar, I presented a webinar on difficult personalities. In that webinar, we talk about various difficult personalities, everything from chronic complainers to your bullies, and ways to approach each of those. And so you may find that helpful. And Susan can also put that into the chat. And it's also here on your slide and in your handout. You can click on the handout as well. So with a vampire, what we want to do is thank you, Susan, perfect. With a vampire, we have to be tough. They are exhibiting very bad behavior, and we need to take a tougher approach. Typically, with a regular vampire, we're going to take a very firm, very tough approach. We need to be painfully obvious on what our expectations are, what their consequences are. Know your options. Can you terminate them? Maybe, maybe not. Can you reprimand them? Can you move them off a project or off of the team to another group where they may be better suited? I mean, we're not going to take a problem employee and just hand them off to another group, which unfortunately is so often what happens within organizations. But they may be better suited somewhere else. So can we do that? Maybe we can go down the discipline path. We can issue a verbal warning or a written warning. What we want to try to do with the vampire is improve their attitude. You can see here the green arrow going up. We want to improve their attitude. Now, we may not be able to move them up to a positive attitude. If we cannot, then what we want to do is at least make it neutral, make it less toxic, so that they take a less toxic position or attitude. Okay, it's still improvement. Now, let's say we have a burned out top performer. You've got someone who's always been giving their extra and they just had enough. And we've all done this, right? We find ourselves falling into that cynical, burned out, poisonous, mad place, right? That ugly place. So you can take a softer approach with that person, because why are they there? They're there because you, the proverbial you, quote, quote, you put them there, whether it's your organization, your group, the culture within your organization. Maybe it is you personally not recognizing that you were punishing them or not managing them as well as you could have. And so recognize that this is fixable, and so show appreciation, provide that recognition and reward, and try to lighten their workload. Now, I say carefully, what happens? How will a top performer react if you were to walk up to them and offer to take things off of their plate or to lighten their workload? How do you think they're going to react? Yeah, they don't always take to it very well, do they? They may believe that they're not doing a good job. They may see it as punishment. Why? What? What's wrong? What? Huh? They're going to see this as a negative thing. And that's just very common. So you can explain to them why you are lightening the workload, and that this is for their benefit. And it's not because they're not doing a good job. It's not because they're not capable. It's for their own good. It's to allow a better sharing of the work, to have everyone pull their full weight, to allow them better balance, work-life balance, or whatever kind of balance you want to call it. Okay, so when it comes to managing vampires, know your options. Now, of course, managing vampires or having that difficult conversation with the vampire will cause stress in you. And so here's that URL again about managing difficult personalities, and Susan had put that into the chat. But having this conversation with the vampire, with a voyeur, and honestly with a cheerleader too, could create stress. So managing or working or having those conversations with any kind of personality or that you find difficult could be stressful. And so what is a stressor? Stressors are different for every person. Sometimes it's working with a very strong personality like a vampire. Sometimes it's having to work with a super nice person that it's hard to find anything, a fault of, but they have a negative impact on the team or on your management and your time and energy. It could be deadlines. It could be somebody yelling at them. It could just be leadership. Somebody in the room who's at a high level and rank could cause stress. So it's different for each person. When we are in some stress, by the way, is fine, because stress keeps us on our toes. Stress helps us deliver our best performance. But there comes a point where if we have stress for too long, it could be chronic and low stress. If it goes on for too long, it's a problem. Or if it's just too stressful, it leads to distress. And distress is a bad thing. So our automatic reaction when we experience stress is to fight, flight, or freeze. Now there's a fourth new automatic reaction they have found is tend and befriend. And I'm not going to address that here, but sometimes when we're under stress, we want to bring loved ones in closer and keep them close to us, family, friends, etc. But I'm going to talk about the three main automatic reactions of fight, flight, or freeze. When we are under stress, we may fight. We just get mad. We get angry. We get loud. We want to fight. We want to argue. Or we may want to just run. We want to leave the situation. We don't want to address the conflict. We've all probably worked for managers who are conflict. They avoid conflict at all costs. They're conflict averse, and those are very difficult people to work for because they never address anything, and that creates its own problem, right? So they flight. They leave. They don't address the conflict, or freeze. They go blank. They don't know what to do. They're just stunned, right? So with practice, we can learn to listen, to negotiate, to come up with solutions, to remain calm. And that comes with practice. And so let's talk about how to do more of those, to move from the automatic reaction to those with practice. So, and I see the comment, Dale, I'll get to that in just a second. Nice. So how do we move from more automatic reaction to a practiced reaction? Well, first, have a plan and stick to your plan. And oops, these slides are moving. Okay. Have a plan and stick to your plan. So know your hot buttons. Know what it is that sets you off. And if you don't know what your hot buttons are, talk to your kids, talk to your siblings. They probably know how to press all of your buttons. But what is it that sets you off? Think about the situations at work when you've reacted. And then have a plan. Let's say you tend to fight. You tend to just get mad and get aggressive. Well, in your case, if you choose to fight, then what you can do is, your plan is to take a few deep breaths and wait to respond. Give other people a chance to jump in and respond. Don't bully and talk over them. And then after, let's just say you count to 10 slowly, then when you do speak, you're going to speak with a softer tone and in a slower pace. Now, if you are mad and you try to talk softer and slower, you're probably talking at a normal pace, right? At a normal volume. But at least it's no longer loud and aggressive. Okay, or if your reaction is to flight, you want to leave, then maybe you just think about planting yourself in a difficult situation. Whether if you're at home on a Zoom call, you just plant yourself, root yourself to your place. If you're standing in front of somebody, you can think about, spreading your feet out to give yourself a more solid base, and then think about, roots growing out the bottom of your feet and just holding you there. And then paraphrase what you hear the other person say, just to allow yourself to get over that discomfort of being there so you can get back into the conversation. Paraphrasing also works with freeze. If somebody is saying something and you just go blank, you can just allow them to talk to, until you can gather your wits, or you can paraphrase what you've heard back so that you're contributing to the conversation until you can get your wits about you, and either write down notes of what you want to say. I do that a lot in meetings when I kind of lose track, or I just kind of go blank. Until you know what you want to say again, and then you can jump back in. But it allows you to kind of gather your thoughts. And then practice. Okay, I'm going to have this meeting. Here's what's going to happen. Then they're going to interrupt me. And when they do, this is what I'm going to do, and blah, blah, blah. Think through it, visualize it, maybe practice it with a trusted person, somebody you trust. And then this will only get better with practice. It's always uncomfortable. So reinforce. Little steps. Every time you do it, it'll get better. It may get hopefully a little easier. And so just reinforce with practice. Okay, Dale, you said you made a fundamental statement that vampires equal burned out top performers. Some vampires, not all, but true. I truly believe many of these were created due to COVID. I truly believe, in my experience, that 2 years of isolation made cheerleaders into voyeurs and top performers into vampires. We will now struggle to bring voyeurs, vamps just to neutral and slowly back to above the line. COVID was definitely exacerbated the problem. And Dale, to your point, that was kind of my observation, is that not everybody adapts to working remotely well. Not, first of all, as an employee, but secondly, as a manager. People who could manage really well in an office didn't always adapt really well to being a good manager virtually. And this is what I learned. I started having a virtual team in 2004, probably around that time. And many of our team members, and there are companies that well before COVID had only virtual teams, big name companies, Fortune 100 companies that I work with that have only virtual teams within certain work groups and functions. And the first thing I noticed when I left management in corporate America and went to work remotely is, even though I was really good in person in the office, it was an adjustment, right? You have to adapt as a manager. So not only as an employee, but as a manager, and it takes people time to do that. Yes, COVID exacerbated it, but I also found that a lot of top performers stayed top performers, and some people became top performers because they had a chance to shine. They had a little more flexibility in their lives, or they felt like they had more control. And so they were able to do better, especially if they had family situations where now that more flexible work helps them. So I don't disagree with what you said. I see that as well, but I also see the other. So probably fair that the opposite happened in some cases too. For those that felt micromanaged, yes, if you had a bad boss especially, that really helps, and suddenly became better performers when less watched. Yes, so true. So yeah, I try to recognize the good and bad in all situations, and if you really try to find it, you can, and you can see where, you know, something may have helped. Okay. And then, so if we offer a reflection, have you, and y'all don't have to type this in, but I would like to see chats if possible. Don't share anything you don't want to share, but have you or your organization, it doesn't have to be you personally, have you, the quote, quote, you, let voyeurs get away with their behavior? And think about, who are those people that you're letting get away with that sub performance? And what can you do about it? Sometimes. Okay, that's fair. Yeah, that's a good answer, right? Sometimes. I've seen it, right? I've seen it sometimes. Okay, so think about the voyeurs. Yeah, unions are, you're right. Absolutely. Unions make it difficult because everybody, you know, there's the work rules, and it's all based on seniority, not based on performance. So it is very hard to change that. So very good point. Yeah. Rare, but sure. Union is also my example because it was union within the government sector. True. So you've got, you know, unions and government, two large organizations. And anytime you get a large bureaucratic organization, that the voyeurs get lost, you know, and in some models, by the way, call these voyeurs dead wood. I didn't like the term dead wood. I like voyeurs. They watch other people get good work done, is the way I like to think of it. But they are easily within any organization if it's larger. Your small ones, maybe not. And they're super lean, but your large organizations, easily 10% of your workforce are probably voyeurs and dead wood. So good. I say sometimes because you don't want to deal with their backlash. That is true. So especially with union rules, that's a whole nother world and a whole nother topic we could talk about in the future. But well, we won't, because every union's different, just like every government agency is different, even if they have similar rules, but they do operate differently. And what you can and cannot do will be specific to that situation. So yes, work with that carefully. Okay, good. Thank you for that. For those inputs and contributions. And think about the cheerleaders on your team. Who are the cheerleaders, and what can you do to energize them? Can you help move them into a little bit more of that top performer category? Can you help them learn how to take initiative? Some people just honestly don't know how to do it. They've never had a good example to follow, and they just need to be shown. And so in that case, you know, try to work with that. Need to understand what they are doing, how they are doing, are they liking it? Many times understanding these points and acting accordingly starts bringing outcomes. Good, Nandita, that's true. That's true. Once, and that kind of goes back to the can't versus won't conversation. Maybe they are not doing it, not because they don't have the skill. I mean, they totally have the skill, but they're not doing something because they just don't want to. They just don't like it. They, you know, whatever that is. So very much, that's a great point. So understanding where they're coming from and what they're doing and why. Do you have any top performers who are no longer working at their best? What action can you take with them? And think about those, you know, how are you punishing them, or how could you be even better with them? Are they maybe at risk of leaving? And how can you stop that? Are they at risk of becoming burned out? How can you help stop that? And then I'm just going to wrap it up because we are running short on time. And what will you do with your vampires? Again, those are the conversations we want to put off until we just cannot anymore. And if you cannot move them into a positive attitude, try to move them to at least a little more neutral. They don't tend to move into the voyeur category. They tend, we would prefer to keep the energy, but improve their attitude. I think sometimes top performers are ignored because management is focused on the other three. Donna, that is true. We tend to focus on problem children. So everybody knows who the vampires are. They are always top of mind because they're the most painful. They're the people everyone's trying to avoid. They might spend more effort in avoiding them than they are in actually addressing them and improving the situation. And so in your experience, top performers are ignored. I could see where they're being taken for granted, right? And when they're taken for granted, that's why they move down into cheerleader or down into vampire or over out of the organization. No, but that's a recipe for disaster. We do not want to take them for granted. So good point. Same above, and can be done to understand. I feel we should have regular contact or connect with the team to see if the balance is maintained in their lives or not. Yeah, you're right. And this is, especially as we work remotely, we need to still keep it personal. We are humans. We're social creatures. We need social lives and abilities and sociability. We need those relationships. We need those connections. So checking in with your team and finding out how they're doing, short personal phone calls. We talk about that on the virtual working, the teleworking session. There are some check-ins that you can do with your team. It doesn't have to take a lot of time, honestly, because we're all stressed and working a lot. We have a lot of responsibilities. Those haven't gone away, but those personal touches and check-ins to see how people are doing, what's going on in their lives, how they're balancing and faring. Just even checking in will help them feel better and help them do better, but also makes you aware of what's going on so you can better balance the workload among your team. Because for some people, timing right now is good, and for others, it's not. Vampires are toxic. Yeah, you don't have to be sorry to say that because they are toxic. That is what they're known for, but I feel they should be moved to self-sustained roles rather than team roles. If possible, if you could make them an individual contributor, like an IC, we used to have IC roles versus management roles, that would be great. Also, they might just be, it depends why they're toxic. Maybe there's a different role or function or job that they could do where they wouldn't be so toxic, where they actually would fit in better and be happier about it. And in that case, they've got the energy, they can put that to good use. And so you're right, maybe it is an individual contributor role, maybe it's within a different organization or group. Okay, perfect. Thank you for that. Nice. So in summary, I think I made all these points, and then I'm going to ask you all a question to send in one last thing. It's easy to reward those voyeurs by not giving them work. We want to energize our cheerleaders so they can take more initiative. We want to avoid taking for granted our top performers or relying on them too much. Recognize when they're getting burned out and help to improve their attitude if that's the case. Don't tolerate those vampires and that poisonous behavior. Stop it, remove it, figure out what you can do about it, escalate it, go to your leadership. And then manage your own stressors when you're having that difficult conversation so that it can be effective. So you're as productive as possible, and keep calm, control your own emotions under stress so that you don't exacerbate the problem. You don't want to raise, up to their level if they tend to fight. You don't want to lower down to their level if they tend to be like a vampire or cynical or whatever. So do that carefully as well. And one last request I have from all of you is, of course, download the handout. Susan put the URL into the chat, so thank you. What is your number one takeaway from today's session? What's your biggest takeaway, or what can you do based on today? And you will have this presentation in the form of the recording, and then the one-page handout is basically all of the presentation on one page. I don't hand out slides, but you'll have it all right there. Everything is on that one-page handout. So the answer is yes, you can have the presentation by just going to that handout URL, and you'll have it all right there. Okay, so what is your number one takeaway from today's session? And do you all have any other questions or comments? I do appreciate your participation so far. It's been great because definitely helps the time go by. We're right at the top of the hour. Any other comments? The square of the people. So the handout does, if you're talking about, let me go back to the square of the people on the last page. You're talking about here? If you're talking about the characteristics, it is there in the blue box at the top. It's got the attitude and effort where they fall. It's got the characteristics under that are all in this slide. Yeah, they're all right there in the blue box. And then down below in that section, just below that are all the steps to take to manage based on those characteristics. Yeah, so it's all there. Cool. Good. Keep calm and move on. That's your big takeaway. I love it. Don't focus too much on negative energy. Whatever we focus on expands. That is true. That's a good just a life mantra, right? Mubashir, Mubashir. I don't want to say your name wrong. I so apologize. But yeah, good point. Thank you so much. And oh, thank you. Good. I got it right. Yay. Dale, thank you. Good presentation. Different take than normal. Is this my model? I wish I could say it was. It is not my model. I heard it early in my career, and I've actually done some internet searches because I wanted to give proper credit if it was somebody else's model, like, you know, IP rules and all that. I tried to watch for, and I really didn't find exactly this model. So I took several models and kind of modified it to make it work based on my experience. So no, it's adapted. That's the best answer. It's adapted. How to handle when vampires are the seniors. So Nandita, couple different thoughts I have here. And I'll just start by saying sometimes the answer is you have to leave. And I hate to say that, but sometimes that is your best action, is you have to take care of yourself and you may have to go elsewhere. But if there's senior leadership, is there another group within the organization where you can work, where you won't have as much of an impact by them and from them? Is there anything you can do within your group to have less of an impact? You may still be within their group, but to be less directly impacted or involved. So that might be an approach you can take. It all depends. The devil's in the details, and it really depends on your particular situation as to how to handle the vampire when they're the senior. But it may just be, and sometimes you can wait it out, because I will say within certain organizations, employees know if they just wait long enough, that person will move on. Changes will be made. There will be a reorg. There will be a whatever. They'll move on. They'll move up. They'll be, replaced, put on special assignment, whatever it is, and it'll take care of itself. So assess your situation to see what might be best for you. Okay, well, everybody, thank you so much for your time today. I'm going to hand it back to Susan. That is the end of my presentation. So thank you for your attention and your contributions.
Vicki, we thank you so much for presenting and for your time today.
Thank you. Thanks, Susan. Thanks, great IT professional, and all of you. Have a great day.